Okay, so we are right at 11 o'clock. And so for the sake of time, to make sure that we're making most of the hour, we can go ahead and get started. I want to say good morning to everyone and welcome to the Fort Worth HR Emerging Professionals Committee's third installment of our career webinar series, which is aim to give you all skills and a chance to hear different speakers and talk about different job searching skills, networking, and today we're going to talk about interviewing. So I thank you for spending time with us this morning. My name is Kenya Wilson, and I'm the Director of Emerging Professionals for Fort Worth HR. And myself, along with our committee, we are very excited to bring to you our speaker for today. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to go over just a few small things. During the session, you will have your microphone muted. If you have any questions during the session, please be sure to share those in the chat, and our team will be sure to share those questions with the speaker to answer your questions as they come in. We will also have time to address those questions at the end of the session. Please be sure to stay tuned after the speaker for information about upcoming events from Fort Worth HR, such as our final session next week and other opportunities provided by the organization. Now I would like to go ahead and introduce our speaker for the day. David Denaro with Keystone Consultants advises executives, managers, and individuals in career planning and in transition. He has successfully coached hundreds of clients who has wanted to change their careers or find similar jobs, and those who have considered consulting. I am certain, more than certain, that you will walk away with a wealth of knowledge after the hour as David shares his expertise with you. So welcome, 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 David Denaro, and I'm going to turn it over to you for our session today.
Great. Thank you very much, Kenya. I appreciate being invited today, and hopefully this will be a session that will give people maybe a different perspective and certainly some new, working information as they work through their career. Whether you're a beginner, early entry into your career, or whether you're a seasoned veteran, I think we're almost always in a position to interview, whether it's formally called that or not. If you're being evaluated by someone, if you're trying to persuade someone in something, it can loosely still be called an interview. So hopefully what we'll go over today will be career-long skills you'll be able to take with you. So as Kenya mentioned, I've been doing this for a really long time. This information comes from my experiences, my studying, and a little bit of theory work that more recent studies, people like Gallup and other folks have done. I'm coming today from the perspective of the candidate. So we're talking about how to handle an interview, how to influence an interview when you are the candidate. It probably would be an interesting exercise to mirror image everything we talk about today if you wanted to think about, tools that you could use as an interviewer. But today we're going to look at it from the point of the candidate. I'm going to try to knock down three issues that candidates pretty consistently bring to my attention when I'm coaching them, and they tell me I need some work on interviewing, Dave, because I'm not that strong of an interviewer. So we're going to try to keep this pretty tightly focused on how to alleviate these three particular problems that I constantly hear about. I call it a 3-point framework. It's really pretty easy. We're going to distill everything you need to do in an interview down to 3 basic rules. All right. So first, let's look at the current situation. People tell me these are the 3 things that bother them the ones. 1, they struggle to sell themselves. I put sell in quotes for reasons. People tell me I let my work speak for myself. That's my MO. And so I'm not a very good self-promoter. I don't pitch myself well. I don't sell myself well. I say, fine, we'll take care of that. Next problem they say is they think a little too slowly in the moment, whether it's anxiety of the interview, a little bit of nervousness, whatever. They always think of their best answer as they're driving home from the interview in their car, and that's just a little bit too late. So we're going to touch on ways to speed up your thinking a little bit in interview. And the third The third problem people come up against is they have an interview that isn't like the one they prepared for. So Keystone's like a lot of coaching outfits. We think we thoroughly prepare people for interviews. We have lists of questions that you could think of, you could potentially get, and what would be your approach to answering them. Here's the problem. The interviewer may not be as skilled as you are as a candidate in asking those questions. So we have some interviewers out there that do believe that interviewing and hiring talent is a core competency. It's one of the big things they have to be very good at as a manager. And you have other interviewers that don't. They wing it. I think we've all been in a situation where you can easily tell early on the interview that you surprised the interviewer by being there. They forgot the interview was happening, or they didn't realize you were the candidate. They were thinking of somebody else, and so clearly they're not terribly prepared. So the third problem is there's not too much consistency to prepare against in terms of the quality of the interviewer. Okay, we're going to take care of that problem as well. Okay. So the current situation is I don't want any of those things to be a barrier to you getting an offer, to my candidate working their way all through the process. You can't control this process. You can for a networking meeting, and you can control a little bit of the networking. And there's a shameless plug for perhaps another couple of webinars in the future, but you can't really control an interview because you're being invited to that meeting and they have the agenda. They're in charge of the agenda, but you can influence it. And I'm going to tell you, there's 3 steps to keep in mind so that you can really influence how that interviewer perceives you, how they think about you as they're thinking about all the other candidates. All right, so 3 rules. Rule number 1, what is an interview? Let's get on the same wavelength as to what an interview really is. And so here's Dave's definition. Okay, I admit you probably won't see this written down anywhere, but this is from my experience. An interview is a conversation to determine a match in 3 areas. Okay, a conversation to determine a match in 3 areas. And I've highlighted words that I really I'm being very specific about: conversation, match, and the 3 areas. So let's talk about the first thing, conversation. That is to remind you as the candidate that to influence this interview, you need to be concerned about the questions you ask. Questions you ask. Everybody's so wrapped up about the answers and preparing answers, they sometimes forget that a conversation depends on dialogue going back and forth. Okay, for the dialogue to go back and forth in an interview, you have to ask your own questions. Now, I'm going to show you in today's webinar 2 extremely simple ways to ask questions in an interview very, very smoothly. But for this to be a conversation, you have to ask questions. If you don't, if you get a question asked of you, you give an answer, you get another question, you get another answer, you get another question, you give another answer. You're being interrogated, not interviewed. Interrogations are not comfortable, but they also don't give the interrogator, the interviewer, as much information about you as possible. So again, you're helping the interviewer out in a weird way when you kind of follow this practice. Okay, what are the 3 areas? So that takes care of my word conversation. And I said, make a match in 3 areas. Okay, well, what are the 3 areas? I'm going to suggest that one of the areas is, what have you accomplished? Okay, there's kind of 2 ways to build an interview. You could go from accomplishments and tree on down. To me, if I were coaching, and when I have coached managers in interviewing, I generally coach them to start there with everything except maybe an entry-level interview. What have you accomplished? And I have coached them to tell people, tell stories about your accomplishments. When you talk about your accomplishment, you are automatically going to surface the skills you used and the experiences you had. Okay. The other way to build an interview is skills up. You ask about a certain set of skills or a certain set of competencies, and if you see the 3 or 4 that you happen to be fixated on in this interview, you're going to try to predict that the person ought to be able to accomplish what the job requires. I think that's a faulty way to do interviewing personally, in my maybe not so humble opinion, because there's always 50 or 60 skills is needed to do a job, you're going to fixate on 3 or 4, probably the 3 or 4 that the incumbent didn't do well. And you're going to say, next time I hire someone, I want to make sure they can do presentations well. And so you ask a bunch of questions about that and you forget about the other 57 skills. So on top of that, there's usually an element, sometimes anyway, an element of fictitious precision. So I think we've all had at some point in our career, somebody say on a scale of 1 to 10, how good are you with Excel? All right, well, there's no universal scale. My 10 could be your 3, vice versa. So again, kind of a dumb question. It would be better to say, what have you done with Excel? Tell me some of the things you're most proud of achieving with Excel. And then I get, as an interviewer, everything I want. So accomplishments would be the one thing, but it's not the only thing. You're also going to be asked questions about your motives. Are you self-motivated? A lot of companies these days are spending an awful lot of money on things called engagement programs. They're trying to get employees to engage, to like, to be motivated to do the work that they're tasked to do. Well, I think it ought to be part of the interview to make sure that to try to determine whether people are self-motivated. And a lot of managers do that, either consciously or unconsciously. They want to know why you've left, why you're interested in their company, why you're interested in the job, that kind of thing. And then the third is fit. And we probably all pretty much know what that is. As I'm trying to simplify things for my clients, I say, think about communication style, think about work style. That would be fit, that would be corporate culture. And that's what I'll keep it at for today's session. So the big goal is matching, okay? This is a big exercise in asymmetrical data. They know what they need in this role, they being the interviewer. And sometimes they'll share it with you, and sometimes you kind of have to dig it out with your questions. You know what you can do and what you want to do and how you best do it. And they have to sort of try to dig that out from you. The whole exercise is a big game of matching. It is not selling. So I'm going to try to knock down issue number 1. You're not selling, right? Selling is pitching features and benefits. And if you do that without knowing that the interviewer needs those things, you're well on your way to being eliminated from the process, especially if you're looking for a good salary and you are bringing to the table things that they don't need. It's usually hurtful to you in the interview process, and that they say he or she won't be interested in this role. It's too small. It's not what they're looking for. They're not really, they've done this before, and you get yourself eliminated. So it's a big exercise in matching. Okay. There is a code to help you figure out what area the question is coming from. And this code will help you think faster, because if you know which of the 3 areas the question has its roots in, you are not thinking about 2/3 of all the other stuff that's floating through your head about the job, right? It helps you focus in. So there is a code for whether it's an accomplishment question, a motivation question, and a fit question. All right. So here's kind of accomplishments, as I mentioned before. Talk about skills and knowledge and experience. Rather have you talk about that than responsibilities. Motivation, motive versus mission. Fit, behavior versus behavior. In other words, this is the match you want to make. The company will call it responsibilities. You're going to talk about your skill, knowledge, and experience. The company's going to talk about their mission. That's a corporate motivator, is their mission, or the goals that they set for that department. You're going to talk about your desire to do that type of work. Okay, that would be a match there. And then behavior to behavior, communication skills, work style, fit, whether you're collaborative. If they're collaborative and you love being in a team environment, that's a match. If you're very independent and you're very team oriented, that's a mismatch. Okay. So here is the code. Bucket 1 would be can do it. Bucket 2, motivation, want to do it. Bucket number 3, will you do it our way? There's a culture that exists in every company. It could be planned for, or it could be just by default, the kind of behavior they accept in their organization. So here's the simple code. If the question begins with why, and I'll preface this by saying, You never say always and you never say never, right? So this works maybe 98% of the time. If the question begins with the word why, I propose to you that that's a motivation question. Okay. Why did you leave your last job? Why are you interested in leaving your current job? Why are you interested in our company? Why are you interested in this role? Those aren't skill questions. Those are what is driving you question. What is pushing you question. So that's a motivation question. I generally tell folks, you answer a motivation question with an emotional response, what we call a high-toned emotion word. Because I love doing this, because I get excited about doing that. So love, excited. I would propose that that would need to be in your answer to make a good match right away to the interviewer. So why question? Motion, the little trick I use, the little mnemonic I use to remember it is the word emotion. The word emotion has the word motion embedded in it. So emotion drives motion. Your feelings drive your behavior. If motivation is the willingness to put extra effort and extra work into something because you want to do it, then that's desire, right? You want to do it. Okay. Second code for fit. If the question begins with the word how and it references some form of human being, it is probably a fit question. In other words, if the question is, how would you work with a colleague who's a near genius, but very abrasive to work with? Well, if you got that question, I'd say you got to think of two things. One, you think of a very smart person you worked with that was difficult to get to. And the second thing you should think of is, do you want to put yourself in that situation again? Because the only reason they're asking that question is because there is someone on the team that fits that profile, right? So how would you work with a manager who at times can be a bit of a micromanager? How would you work with an investor who thinks they know it all? How would you work with a vendor? Okay, vendor, investor, manager, colleague, those are people. So if the question is how, then references a person, you're probably best to start talking about your communication style and your work style as part of the answer. Okay. I told you at the very beginning, I wanted to make this super simple because this framework can be used in the moment, in an interview, live, not the kind of preparation. You don't need the kind of preparation where you read 100 questions and you try to memorize answers, but you use this framework to decode the interview live while it's going on. And then you don't have to worry about memorizing, answers to 99 questions that you might never get in an interview. You can just deal with the questions that you do get. Okay. So to be able to do that, I am going to confess to you that there are too many leads to a delivery, or sometimes I call it delivery, sometimes I call it accomplishment types of questions. So there's too many questions. There's too many leads to that. So we're just going to use process of elimination because it's the easiest thing to do in the moment. If the question did not begin with why and did not begin with how people, it's by default an accomplishment delivery type of question. And there's a certain kind of way to flow an answer out for that kind of question. And that's pretty much all you have to remember is it didn't begin with why and it didn't begin with how people. For example, if the question is, how would you, and you think, ooh, here comes a fit question, but the rest of it is, how would you use our database to sift through the noise in a big bunch of data to find the actual signal, the actual accurate trend? Well, our database isn't a person. Our database is a thing. So that's a how thing question. So it defaults over to an accomplishment question. Okay. We just finished rule number 2. There's only one rule left. Okay. How to formulate an answer that can be received easily. Listen to, absorbed, understood easily. So a lot of you probably have heard of the PAR technique or the STAR technique. I'm going to modify it slightly because remember at the beginning of the webinar, I promised you I would tell you 2 simple ways to make this conversational. In other words, 2 simple ways to ask questions. And believe it or not, in your answer is one of those simple ways. So PARQ, the way that we describe it is P stands for problem. So if someone asks you a question, how would you use our database to sift through the noise? You'd say, yes, I got to tell you, I've worked on that problem many times before. Or I've worked on something very, very similar. I always try to coach candidates, always try to start with a positive. Never, if you can, never start with a negative. Never say, I've never used our database. Okay. People tend to real time absorb answers. So you just gave them a no. And now if you talk for another minute and it is some good stuff that you're saying, it's not going to register as well as, it's not going to register as well because they heard no right off the bat. And they're going, oh, that's a shame. And they're thinking about their next questions, and they're thinking about what's for lunch, and they're thinking about a lot of other things. And so you want to say, yes, I've done it. Or you want to say, yes, I've done something remarkably similar. Or you want to jump buckets and go to motivation right away and say, now see, our database, that is a tool that I am just dying to get my hands on. I'm a quick learner. I know some other methodologies, but our database I know is the premier database. I'm kind of making, for all of your data analysts out there, you can tell I'm making things up here, but hopefully I'm making the point, pretty clearly. Okay, A is the big piece of the answer. P might, if you thought of this as like a 2-minute answer, and I always try to coach folks to be pretty brief with your answers, layer the answers in. Problem, might take you 2 or 3 seconds to acknowledge that you have faced this problem before. Your action is going to be the big piece of the answer. If you took my 2-minute answer, that would be 120 seconds. You just use 2 or 3 seconds to talk about, to acknowledge that you faced that problem before. The actions is going to be like 110 seconds. It's the big, big, big piece of the answer. This is where you will talk about the situation and the experience and the tools and the methods and the tactics. And I just tell folks, think of it as a timeline, start at the beginning and end at the end. And don't sort of curl all around and take side trips and everything. So if you said, yes, so I've used our database in all kinds of situations. For example, just 3 months ago, I actually used it to sift through. And so what I did is I did this, and we pulled a team together, and I did this, and we did this, and I did this, and we did this. And I tell folks, you really have to use the word I a decent amount of times, even if you're a very team-oriented, very collaborative person. And people always tell me, Dave, there's no I in team. I feel very uncomfortable saying I that many. And I come back to them and say, yeah, but there's 2 I's in interview. And that's what you're doing. You're interviewing. The manager has to know what your role was, what your contribution was. If you keep saying, we did this, we did this, we did that, we did that, a sharp interviewer might make you go through that entire answer all over again, picking out or being a little bit more specific about what you did. They might say, gee, I like what I hear there. Could you just go through it again and just tell me a little bit more about your specific contribution or your specific role? Okay, you just use 2 time slots to answer 1 question. Okay, so, I don't know what the right ratio is. I don't think maybe there is a right ratio, but I generally say at least try to be 50-50. We did this, I did this, we did this, I did this, we did this. You do have to talk. You do have to say I a decent amount so the interviewer knows what, did you run the whole meeting, or did you just go get the coffee for the meeting, or what was your role on the team? Okay, the R takes another 2 or 3 seconds again. That's the results. Okay, that's the accomplishment. I always love to have an answer come up with a result. It'd be nice if the result was great. It doesn't always have to be that way. I've had lots of folks saying, I did this, I planned it out, we ran meetings, I did this, we did this, I did this, we did this, I did this. And I'm pretty confident it would have worked, but that's when we got laid off. And so I'll never really know. As long as the actions are there, you're going to score high points, if you will, for the answer, because they know the steps that they would probably take. And since you're matching them, there's that word matching again, you're going to be okay. If you can have a great result, if you can say, yeah, and we implemented it and it made $1 million in the first 3 weeks, obviously, that's pretty good. So we have P, 2-3 seconds. We have A, about 110 seconds. We have R, 2-3 seconds. By my math, we have about 4 seconds left, and that's where the Q comes in. This is the first of the 2 super duper simple ways to make this conversational. Q stands for question, you probably guessed, and I wanted a question that tests your answer real time. I want you to get a feeling for whether the answer landed well right then and there in the moment or not. And so the question would be something like this. You go to the results, and again, we did it, and I think they're still using that process to this day. That's the result. And without missing a beat, without letting any airtime in there, I would coach you to ask a question like, is that what you're looking to do here? Or would that work here? Or would that fit here? In other words, you're asking the interviewer to give you a grade on the answer you just gave them, real time, right then and there. Okay. Don't ask, did I answer your question? Okay, because that really doesn't go to the content. That just says, did I give you what you need to know? The answer from the interviewer's point of view could be, yes, that answered my question, and it's pretty clear you don't do what I need done here. But they don't voice it, so you don't know. Okay, you want to say, would that work here? And it's kind of a binary answer question. You're going to get only one of a couple of answers. Obviously, the one you're hoping for is, yes, Dave, if you could do that, that would be awesome. That is exactly what we're looking to get done here. Home run, well, or touchdown, I guess, better. If you get a positive reaction, I would jump buckets and go from the accomplishment bucket right into the motivation bucket. I double down on motivation. I would say, awesome, because I would love to do that again for you. Okay, you scored big points on the accomplishment delivery bucket. Jump to motivation right away. Okay, what if you get the other answer? What if you get the answer, nah, I could see how that would work at Keystone, Dave. But just we're not, that I don't think would work here. We're looking for that. Okay, I still think that's a good answer because you're learning it real time while you still have a chance to recover. So if you find that answer out a week from now, when the recruiter calls and says they liked you, but they're going to go with somebody else, you can't recover. You can't get back into that interview. It's a week later. Okay, but right then, if they say, no, I don't think that's exactly what we're looking for, you're going to ask another question, a probing question. You're going to say, really, where was I off? Or really, what were you looking for? Or how would you do it? Okay. They're going to give you more situational detail, undoubtedly. They're going to say, well, you had a big staff and you talked about bringing in a consultant and you had that automatic test software. We're like 7 people here. We don't have any of that. We have to do it all. And you say, oh, so you just come in on a Saturday and push all the buttons, break everything, then log it, and then have the developer come in and fix it. You do it. Man, yes, that's the way we did it. Oh, I did that. And you reference another story now that you have a little bit better detail about what they're looking for. Okay. So the interviewer didn't give you a complete scenario about what they need, but through your questions, you dug it out and now you made a better match. It's a win-win for both of you. Okay, the interviewer didn't do such a hot job in describing the situation and what they need, but you didn't give an answer that didn't fit and let it slide. So, win-win. Okay, let's take that as a cassette and let's slide it into the formal process of an interview. I mean, this is probably all pretty familiar to everybody on this call. An interview basically has 3 stages, the way I look at it. It has a beginning stage, an icebreaker, maybe the first couple of 3 minutes. Nice to have you. Did you find your, well, we used to say, did you get here okay? Was the traffic okay? Now it's all Zoom, right? It's all Teams. So, that's different icebreakers. You're going to get what we call the exit question. We prepare candidates. Realize we work a lot with folks that have been laid off through no fault of their own. And so we prepare them. You're going to get a question, what happened at XYZ company? Why did you leave? And the 20-second response is, we call it an exit. Okay, so you're going to get asked your exit, even if it's, why are you looking? Even if you're gainfully employed somewhere, somebody's probably going to say, so why are you interested in moving? Why are you interested in leaving? That's a question you can prepare for. It's going to come up pretty much like clockwork. TMAY question, that's the tell me about yourself question. So you're probably always going to get that, even if it's just the interviewer you're surprised. And the classic way to kind of regroup is, so why don't you start off by telling me a little about yourself? And that reminds the interviewer who you are, which one of the three resumes is, belongs to you, so to speak. Okay, that's going to be the first couple of 3 minutes. I have a dollar sign there because sometimes money comes up. Money comes up sometimes in the early stage as a screen. What kind of salary are you looking for? What are your salary expectations? You're not negotiating then. That's why I have the other dollar sign way at the end of the process. First dollar sign is just a screen. Make sure you're in the ballpark. Don't try to negotiate that. Last one is when they push an offer across the table. That is when you do negotiate. So I just have that up as a reminder. It could be a possible question on both ends of the interview, both ends of the process. Then you have the major, whatever, if it's an hour interview, it's the major, 45, 50 minutes of questions and answers. I generally see from my coaching, when I debrief my clients after interviews, they were asked somewhere between 5 and 6 major questions. Okay, where they would use that PAR method to answer the questions. That's where we would use the 3. This is probably where you use the 3 rules that we talked about. You know that an interview is conversational, it's matching, and it's about 3 areas. You know the code words, you know to do PARQ. That's the middle part. And then the interviewer might tap their wrist and say, look, we only have about 5 minutes left, and I've been doing all the talking. Before we wrap up for today, do you have any questions? And I somewhat warn people in my experience, that is a trick motivation question. You need to say yes. I understand you only have a couple minutes left, but yes, because a lot of times if you have no questions, it's interpreted by the interviewer that you're not really interested in the job. Even though you asked a bunch of questions all during the interview, it's kind of like the exit and the TMAY question. It's kind of a regular piece of an interview, and you don't want to miss the boat. You don't want to undermine all the good work you've done. So I generally say ask culture questions. Culture questions can be very elastic. You can ask, sure, we haven't talked too much about your interview, I'm sorry, your management style. If I were to ask other folks on your team, and frankly, I hope I do have a chance to, how would they describe your management style? All right, so if there's 2 minutes left, I give you a 2-minute answer to that on the interview. If I've got 3 minutes left, I can give you a 3-minute answer. It's fairly elastic. If for some reason you've already talked about that, you could ask the next echelon up, which would be team, the team dynamics of the team you're about to join. You might say, yeah, give me a sense of team dynamics here. Is it does my work rely on everybody else's work and their work relies on my work, or do we work on one problem cohesively, or are we more independent? We're at home, we have our own stack of work, we work more independently. So team, collaborative, that sounds good. Independent, that sounds good. I'm not leading the witness. And hopefully they say, yeah, this is how it really is here. If for some reason you've touched on management style and team dynamics, I say your last option would be to ask a question about corporate culture. So what kind of culture is your CEO driving here? Okay, and then they're going to talk. When you ask a question, some of it is for your own information, but again, matching, my concept of matching here, you would love to ask questions and that highlight your strengths. You'd love to ask questions or love to respond to questions where there is a match, so that you can communicate to the other party that indeed there is a match there. Okay. So
Dave, we have a question. We have a question from the audience. Laura wants to know, if money comes up in the beginning, should you be direct on your requirements or state a salary that is commensurate with the position and market?
It's a great question. And so my bit of coaching, it violates probably everything teachers and parents told you when you were growing up. I would answer a question with a question. Okay. So if someone asks me these days, so what kind of salary are you looking for? Because I think there's 22 states in the country where you have to phrase it that way. You can't ask what you used to make. I would say, gee, that's an interesting question. And I know we don't want to waste each other's time. with a, you know, a poor fit here, a poor match. What's the budget, or what are you trying to budget this position in at? So you acknowledge the reason for the question. Let's make sure, I know why you're asking. Let's just make sure it's a match. But again, asymmetrical data, they have the budget. They know the salary information, you don't. Ask. Okay. Many times when people actually do that, they'll say, you know, we're trying to keep it in the, you know, we're trying to keep it at 110, 120, something like that. And if you're anywhere close, because I always coach folks to try to negotiate at the end, but so if you're anywhere close, you should say something like, no, there's a number in there. I would imagine we can agree. There's a number somewhere I imagine we can agree on. I mean, how loose is that? You're not promising anything or committing to anything. Okay. If you're in the ballpark, that will usually work. Sometimes you'll get somebody come back and say, no, I asked first. So if you say, what are you trying to budget for? You say, I asked first. I'd rely on market data. I wouldn't rely on your old salary. I would check salary.com maybe before I even started a search. I would bump up the numbers that I see there by about 15%. Salary.com is a very reliable site. They do rigorous salary surveys. The reason they're free to you is because they're old. They're about 4 years old. Markets move 3-4% every year for the past 3, 4, 5 years. So 15%, bump up the ranges you see. If you're a really good performer, you want to be up more near the 75th percentile. If you're pretty junior, yeah, you're going to probably be looking at around the 50th, 55th percentile. The other source I refer people to is the Robert Half 2022 salary survey. So Robert Half, HALF, they're now an international search firm. People that are old like I am remember them as the accounting agency, but they're well beyond that these days. They do a very reliable survey and they publish it for free every year. So you can reference that and you can respond to the answer by saying, yeah, you know, my research into the marketplace is, you know, I'm probably able to command somewhere in the, you know, and I pick a really big range, like 50th to 75th percentile, somewhere in the, you know, 120 to 155 range, something like that. Is that, you know, your budget as well? So that's how I would answer it. I'd try to make it as loose as possible. You have no leverage at the beginning. You have leverage at the end. When you're the person they want, that's when you can truly negotiate. You don't want to try to negotiate when you have no leverage.
Okay. Dave, I have a question. Tell me about yourself questions. You know, can you give us a parameter, like how long should you speak for? Do you talk about experience chronologically backwards or forward? Or
Yep. So most of us have a summary on the top of our resume, and it's for good reason. It's the executive summary. If you've ever looked at a research paper, 150 pages, the summary of the executive summary on the top of that research paper says, here's the problem I was trying to solve, here's my methodology, and here's my results. Okay, it's like half a page, 1 page. The other 149 pages is all the nitty-gritty detail. I want you to think that way when you do a summary. You get to brand yourself the way you want to brand yourself. You get to say, well, at heart, I'm a data analyst. So at heart, I'm a data analyst. That's how I think about myself. That happens to be this job that I'm applying for. Did I ever have that title before? No, maybe not. But I've done the work. I've done the responsibility section. I've done most of the skills. I've done most of the responsibilities that are in that job. That's why I'm applying. So I keep a tell me about yourself to about 30, 40 seconds. I would talk about what I am at heart and how I add value to a company. Think like a CEO. I always do it in a way that adds revenue. I always do it in a way that keeps an eye on cost. I always do it in a way that keeps our current clients extremely satisfied. I always do it in a way that adds to our customer base. I always do it in a way that keeps us compliant. Those are the 5 things CEOs tell me that they most focus on at a really high level when I coach CEOs. Revenue, costs, client satisfaction, client acquisition, that's marketing and sales, and compliance. Every industry says compliance these days. So if you can say, at heart, I do this, and I have a track record of doing it well, and it does this for my firm, that's a perfect branding line. That's your perfect first line. Okay. I'm expert at A and B and C and D and E. People say I have the ability to mentor and coach and develop. So a big thing of hard skills, a big thing of soft skills. As you can see from my resume, I've had a chance to work at really good companies. Good companies are tough to get into. So if you've worked at good companies, you can say, you don't have to say every one, you don't have to say what you did. I've worked at good companies, and again, as you can see from my resume, they've been able to elevate me to positions of higher responsibilities. You just basically said I worked for good companies and they promoted me. Search firms call that the pattern of achievement. If you have a good pattern of achievement in your background, that's all you need to say about your experience at this point in the interview. You don't have to go through and talk about the dates and the accomplishments and the responsibilities. That'll take 40 minutes. Okay, they don't want you to walk through your resume normally. They just want you to give the executive overview. And I'd end with education. You know, then I'd say, as you can see, I went to this school, or I've got my associates here, I got my bachelor's here, I got my PhD, whatever it is. I just end with that. And then, according to Dave's rules, I'd end with a question. Remember, it only took you 30 seconds, 40 seconds to do that. I would end with digging for needs. I'd end with, I know I did that pretty quickly, Kenya. Is there something you're just dying to know about me? Or is there something there that you would like me to elaborate on? If Kenya comes back and says, yeah, tell me a little bit about your experience at XYZ company, that might be because she needs that experience. That might be a need. And so now I'm focused on needs again. I'm not just pitching. I'm not just selling. I am focusing on needs. Does that answer the question, Jim?
Yes.
Okay.
And sometimes it's just going to be so broad that people don't know when to shut up, right? Tell me about yourself.
Yeah. So keep it short. I like layering things in. Remember, my general rule of thumb is people don't really absorb much more than about 2 minutes of what you're telling them. So if you're still talking 5 minutes later, they're absorbed the first 2 minutes. And while they were doing that, you talked for the remaining 3. And that's when they get that glazed look. It's that you can talk faster than people can process. Okay, so keep the answers short and keep questioning them. Am I on the right track? Is this what you're looking for? And that's what I mean by layering in answers. Okay, it's it's your way of controlling that they're understanding you. Okay, so again, I don't know if I succeeded, but my goal today was to give you 3 simple rules to really influence an interview and make it better for both parties. You, because you'll go farther in the interview process, and the interviewer if they didn't happen to be running a stellar interview in that moment. So to really influence, as a recap, should be a conversation, not an interrogation. The ability your ability to make it a conversation depends on your questions, not just your answers. Okay, it is a big exercise in matching, not selling. And interviews can be very variable. You could run up against a very good interviewer, and then the very next round, it's a very poor interviewer. So to memorize the answers to 100 different standard questions, I just find at this point in my career, it'd be better to remember these 3 rules and go with the flow of each than to try to, you're going to memorize 100 answers, and I just told you you're only going to get 6 questions. So I don't think that's a really good use of time. Remember the framework, definition of an interview, what the 3 areas are and the codes, PARQ. You'll be able to handle any interview in the moment. I would suggest very successful. So I hope I was able to do what I set out to do with you. I hope this was pretty interesting and not only theoretical, but gave you some very practical things that I'd love you to practice. And that's kind of the rub, right? We talked about information today, but information isn't skill. You have to practice it. You have to make some mistakes. You have to learn. You have to do it again and again and again. It's only practice that builds skill. And, that's what I would encourage you all to do after this. We have this added dimension. We were talking about this a little bit earlier. We have this added dimension that lots of interviews happen virtually these days. So over Zoom and Teams and WebEx. And so you know all these best practices as well as I do. Make sure all of this is right. I'm going to focus on the last one, professional space. What we have been seeing in the marketplace is at the beginning of COVID, if you were taking an interview in your kitchen or your bedroom and that was the background, that was okay. Because your interviewer was in their kitchen or their bedroom and the dog was walking by. And so, you know, it was okay because that's the way that now, especially if the role is a remote role or a hybrid role, and extra, especially if it's a role where you're going to deal with clients and more senior people, stakeholders in the organization, they want to see that your background is professional. Right? You can do that one of two ways. If you're fortunate and you can have some dedicated space, you tidy it up and you have a nice simple background, bookshelf, paintings, great. Or you use a virtual background. All right, but people want to see that if you're going to talk with clients, that the client has the sense that you're in professional space, not your kitchen. And that's a change over the past maybe year or so that we've seen that recruiters have said. I just didn't, you know, I didn't get a good vibe. I didn't get a good feeling. It's kind of a messy background. And we've heard that, so we're reacting to it. Okay, so there's a couple of tips on video and virtual interviews. My name's Dave Denaro. If anybody had any questions at all, I'd be happy to entertain them through email. It's ddenaro@keystonepartners.com. But I'll end pretty much where I started at the beginning. I really do think that a candidate can definitely influence the trajectory of an interview using the 3-point framework that I just overviewed. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Dave. And a couple of questions. You know, one thing to recap briefly for us is going back to the "tell me a time when" type of question. Somebody had mentioned that they struggled with digging up details, right, for that specific situation. So if we can go back and recap briefly again how we can tackle those.
Yeah, so that's the perfect kind of question for that PARQ format. All right, so the P is pretty easy. It's yes, I've done it before, or yes, I've done something remarkably similar. Let's say you didn't do it in Excel, you did it in Access. So you'd say, yeah, I've done it similar. If I've made presentations to small groups, they want you to make presentations to big groups. You'd say, yes, I've done something remarkably similar. The worst answer I'd like you to start with, the worst P, is now see, that's what I would love to get my hands on. I aspire to be whatever X in my future, and I know I'm going to need that in my background. I desperately want to get that in my background. That's why I'm interested in the job. So you jump on motivation because you don't have anything else. The A is the big piece, and the A is, I think, what you're alluding to. Think of it as a timeline. What was the beginning of that project or process or exercise? What was the end? And just fill in 2 minutes of sort of what happened, or 110 seconds of what happened. You're actually walking through what you did, what your boss told you to do, what the test was like, you're just walking through the steps that were taken from beginning of the project to the end that you were involved with. If it was a one-day project, then that 110 seconds will have a decent amount of detail in it. If it was a 2-year project, I'm still only giving you 110 seconds. So you're going to have to give a level of detail that's a higher level of detail. You can't go into real nitty gritty stuff because you'll run out of time, right? So you're going to talk about the actions you took, the skills you used on a timeline being from the beginning to the end. Does that help at all answer that question a little bit more completely?
Great. No, good feedback on that. Thank you. Okay. And thinking about too, just on that same note, after the interview, I think you touched on this briefly, but some people like to send notes. Some people like to ask for feedback directly afterwards. Yeah. Anything that you think of as a best practice for that? Yeah,
I mean, I know this sounds funny because literally Jim might be able to tell you in my organization, I am the card-carrying introvert. I'm not an extrovert in the least. And at the close, I would still coach someone to say, when they want to close, they generally say, hey, thanks, Dave, for the time. You've given us a lot to think about. We'll be back in touch. I have some other candidates to talk with. And I would coach my candidate to say, thank you very much. I have to tell you, I really enjoyed, it's an emotion, it's a positive tone of emotion. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope that it continues. What would be the next steps for me? So that's my standard close. Ask them, what's the next step? I know a lot of times the manager gets coached to, well, don't really make a commitment, especially for first people that you're talking to, because you don't know who you're going to talk with afterwards, and you don't want to tell someone they're coming back and then not invite them back. But that would be for HR to coach the manager. I'm coaching the candidate, so I would coach the candidate to ask and see if you could get the manager to leak a little, to say, I can't believe you're not going to come back. This is going to be great. Now I'm comfortable. Worst case is they'll just say, no, well, I can't really, we enjoyed the conversation too. I really can't commit. I have more people to look for. Wouldn't be fair. All right, you're no worse off than you were before. I would send a thank you note within 24 hours or so. An email is fine. Thanking them for the time, again, showing motivation for the role, for the company, and asking, again, what the next steps would be for you. You're hoping to get back, take the next step, that kind of thing. Yeah. So I hope, does that answer the question? You'd be positive, and you'd be asking for their feedback on, are you going to take the next steps?
Yeah, no, that answers that question. There's time for a one or two more. It looks like you're inspiring some additional questions. So in the chat, we got one more. It says, if you have a history of job hopping, quote unquote, due to the pandemic, some say this reflects poorly on a resume, but how can we address this during the interview positively without being overlooked as a candidate?
Yeah. So the quick answer to that is, again, matching. If you can do what they want, that's the delivery part, the accomplishment part. Now you're going to get grilled on the motivation piece. If you job hop because somebody offered you $500 more to do that job, and then $500 more to do the next job, and that's the reason. So in other words, the reason for jumping was money. You're going to be telling the interviewer, if you can't keep up compensation wise, I'm gone. So not the best way, because somebody in this marketplace can pretty easy to get outbid. So that's not something that matches well up against motivation. If you tell someone, no, I've made a few moves because I haven't exactly found the you might not use the word mission, but I haven't found the oncology company like yours that I really wanted to commit to, because I am bound and determined to be on the team that finally gets rid of oncology. Well, if that's an oncology company, they're okay with your motivation now because it syncs up with what they do. They feel like, I can hang on to this person, or it's something I can address. Money, almost anybody can outbid almost anybody else. If that's your motivation, I'm not telling you to be dishonest about it, but you have to understand you're a bit at risk. That's not being something that can match up well against. But if you say why you moved is something that they can handle motivation wise, you're going to be fine.
Very good. One more reference is directing your interviewers to your LinkedIn recommendations. So when somebody writes a positive recommendation about you on LinkedIn, if you're sending a thank you note, you say, hey, wanted to send you a link, link to my page here. Here's what other people think of some of the work and skills that I have. What do you think of that?
It's not bad. I'm the biggest fan on the planet for LinkedIn. I think it's the greatest tool ever invented for career management, not just searching, but for actually managing your career so that you can do what you aspire to do, so that you can be the best you can possibly be in your career. But there are things about LinkedIn that people don't seem to pay too much attention to. Recommendations is kind of one of those things where you should have at least a couple, so that somebody doesn't say, aren't there at least two people that would say something nice about you? So it's like a detractor if you don't have it, but when you do have them, it's not necessarily a plus. People are going to want to talk with folks. And so for you to be able to not only point them towards your LinkedIn, but to say, look, I got to tell you a lot of things we talked about. I have a boss or I have a colleague that you should definitely get in touch with if you want to know a little bit more about how I performed or how I behaved there. We call that a challenge. You're actually challenging your interview to check your references. Sometimes they believe you so much about that. They say, well, who would do that if I wasn't going to hear something good? And then they never check. But a lot of times they will check, so don't bluff. But that's when you're directing them to particular people to reference check that way. I do that probably more than I direct them to something that's pre-printed on my profile. Good questions, though.
Yeah, we don't see any additional questions. Kenya, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
Okay, so thank you again, Dave, for such an awesome session. I think that we all can agree that the information you provided us with has been value for everyone in attendance.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to thank everyone who joined us today and spent time with us this early morning and afternoon for your attendance as well. If you enjoyed the session, please consider attending our session next week on Thursday, June 30th, which kind of closes our career series out. And this will cover successful networking strategies. Networking is a key element of job searching and career transitioning that many people kind of forget or gloss over. Want to miss that one. Also, consider joining us for our next luncheon, Fort Worth HR's Luncheon and Legal Update on July 20th, 2022. You can find information about that on the website. If you are not a member of Fort Worth HR, please consider joining us. Along with events such as this, you will be able to take advantage of different networking opportunities, different mixers, professional development, certification preparation, as well as professional emphasis groups in your area of career interest. Also, be sure to stay tuned on our website, Fort Worth HR, FWHR.org, for information about our 12th annual Strategic Mindset Conference, which takes place in September. Again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Dave, for your expertise. Thank you, committee, for helping us bring this to fruition and supporting everyone in the session. And I hope you all have a wonderful week and afternoon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Kenya.
Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.